All right, it's 4 o'clock, so I'll call the meeting to order. Councillor Turner sends his regrets today. He's out of town. First is, are there any disclosures of pecuniary interest? There being none, we'll move on to the consent items. Would anyone like a consent item pulled? Being none, we'll bring the consent items up. Need a seconder? Anything further? Anyone wish to speak to any of the items? No? We'll call the vote.
That's a record for consent.
Don't speak so early.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 4-0.
And we'll move on to the first scheduled item, which is item number 7, a delegation with regard to Chelsea Green Meadows. Good afternoon. Good to see you. Go ahead.
Does that not come up or? Good afternoon, Chairman Squire, members of Planning Committee. My name is Paul Hind. I'm the manager of land development for Trident Group of Companies. Don DeJean is out of the country this week and regrets to be with me today, but gives his apologies to the committee. Speaking on behalf of Paul Arts from Archon Developments on his behalf as well. 2423652 Ontario Limited is a numbered company, one of a number of companies associated with the Trident Group of Companies. And I'm here tonight to speak to Planning Committee on a application which was jointly submitted by Archon and our company 2423652 with respect to a brownfield incentive application. In January 6th of 2016, there was a submission for a brownfield incentive application. Business case was submitted to the City of London Planning and Regeneration Department for consideration. And the business case was a supplementary document to the original application that was submitted to the city on October 22nd, 2009 by Archon. So it's an application which has been on the books for quite some time. And the property in question is comprised of what is now an under construction 66. Yes.
Just to help us out, could you go to your slide view so that the map actually is large enough on our screens to read? That's great.
My apologies. Chelsea Green Meadows, as it's referred to, is located immediately south of the Chelsea Green Park on the south side of the south branch of the Thames River, east of Adelaide Street, north of what was formerly the Brookside Arena, now called the Ice Pad Arena. Generally Brookside and Terrace Street, which was now renamed Hayes Street. For some of the longer-term members of council, you may recall the rather lengthy planning process that was involved in getting this through to fruition. The Brownfield Incentive Program was adopted by council in February 2016 and approved by the minister. And the Brownfield Incentive Program is intended to remove obstacles that hinder brownfield remediation and redevelopment in the City of London. The redevelopment of brownfield sites can stimulate environmental improvements and community viability while utilizing the existing infrastructure. program uses financial incentives to evaluate the properties for real contaminations and encourages the private sector to invest in those properties for which remediation and redevelopment are feasible. In this particular case, there was a rather extensive or long-time history of industrial use and contamination and a serious threat of leaching into the south branch of the Thames River. In 2009, Archon undertook the remediation works, and the original estimate to clear the site from a brownfield property was approximately $150,000. The actual cost that came in was about $149,000 and change, and that work was all undertaken, and the Ministry of the Environment issued the certificate of compliance for the lands to be reused for residential purposes. The business case that was submitted in January 6, 2016 was on the basis that the lands were rehabilitated to the tune of approximately $150,000, and now there is a new 66-lot single detached unit residential development in an area that has historically seen very, very little development activity. The former site was completely bare. In the bottom right-hand corner is the Chelsea Green Park, which Triadon and Archon significantly and diligently undertook to clean up. There has been a methane gas barrier constructed between the park and the residential portion, which may bring back some memories to the longer-term members of council. And you can see the 66-lot configuration as it stands now. When Archon and Triadon entered into the agreements with the home builders, it was on the understanding that the 2009 application that was originally submitted was a carry forward, and that one of the missing pieces of information was that there wasn't the business case. The business case was submitted, and very, very quite clearly, you know, one looks at the incentive program as being there's a brownfield site with the desire of council to remediate brownfield development to allow for something better to occur, which would generate revenue and a tax base, thus clean up a brownfield site and let's see some residential development, and that has what's happened. When we made application for this, we ran into a stumbling block with council, because council is saying the only mechanism or the only procedure in place to receive the rebate is at the building permit stage. Well, Archon is not the builder. 2423-652 is not the home builder putting in the building permit application. So they're saying, if we give you the rebate at the building permit stage, it's an unfair windfall to you because you didn't put the building permit in. Well, the money was taken out of one wallet and paid for, and all of the agreements that are in place are such that the money was going to be coming back through the building permit timing. And we had suggested to staff that maybe every 10 building permits that are issued, give the equivalent of the rebate and pay it back to Triadon and Archon. It wasn't Marlowe Homes or Sunlight Homes or Warrington Homes that paid for the rehabilitation, but those are the builders that happen to be in this case. And staff said, well, we're in a little bit of a dilemma, because what normally happens is that there's one site, one person cleans it up. Typically it's a site plan application, and that one person that cleaned it up, put in the application, is then able to get their money back. It's all a one-person process, where in this case we have two people that paid for it who are looking for the grant money that should be afforded to them, but unfortunately, because they're not the one that put the building permit in, there was some reluctance on issuing a repayment to them. And we've suggested every 10 or 15 permits, just issue the grant money to the name of the developers. The homeowners the home builders are all fully aware that they're not entitled to make application because they were not the ones that paid for the works to be undertaken. So we were advised by staff that the only recourse we had was to come to planning committee and ask for your consideration of discussing a possible way that the monies, which clearly have been paid, we provided the receipts for it, to be reimbursed for that money through whatever mechanism and timing period that it would be appropriate to both council and planning staff. We would be working together with them. You know, I'm suggesting every 10 permits or whether it's every 15. We know that there's about 15 houses that are actively under construction right now. It goes without saying the clear benefits of having 66 lot residential subdivision with the associated taxes and building development fees that are being paid far outweigh the $150,000 it cost to clean up the site from a brownfield site that was causing some potential serious significant issues if left uncleaned.
Thank you. Any questions, technical questions? And then I'll ask staff to just respond. Councilor or Deputy Mayor?
Well, I was just wondering, maybe we should hear from staff
Go ahead,
first,
that's fine
and
with
then
me.
let's ask our
Yeah.
questions.
Can staff just let us know what the position is?
I think Mr. Hind accurately gave you a chronology of the events that happened here. Our dilemma, and the reason why it's before you today, is because we have nothing in the permissions you've given us for administering the Brownfield CIP incentive program to allow his circumstance. It isn't delegated to staff to do so. In fact, Brownfields works differently than the rest of the incentives, where there's a more routine way of dealing with applications. They go through a review process. If they meet the criteria, provide the documents that need to be provided, staff can issue the incentives without any further need to come before PAC or council. In the Brownfield CIP, that CIP program is set up so that any incentive has to come to council ahead of time to say which of the incentives that are available would you like to apply to the property at the time that it's being applied for. And we would come with a report, make recommendations on the financial implications and so forth, but that didn't happen. We didn't have a business case at the time of application from the prior legal entity that was interested in pursuing it, and then property ownership changed, and we didn't have a way of retroactively granting money to that new property owner entity for work that was done in a previous one. So that was one difficulty that we came up against. And then the other one is we don't have, as Paul correctly said, a way of administering a rebate program through to individual lots. Ours is set up so far as the person that does the work gets the incentive. The incentive is paid back for the demonstrated value that they're entitled to. And then if they want to sell off lots or whatever, that's up to them. So we don't have an administrative way that we've set up to do that. I don't know what else to anticipate in ways of a question, but we are properly here because we have no other way of dealing with this particular issue.
All right, we'll go to questions then. Deputy Mayor?
So, a couple questions. I guess to Paul, I guess my question would be, I mean, hindsight's 20/20. I guess you could have apportioned on a number of different ways. You could have done it on a square footage basis or whatever to the individual lots as part of the sale of the lots. And then they would have recouped it at permit time. So it would have cycled through at that, and there would have been 76 different, or how many lots there was, I can't remember, 66 lots. There would have been 66 applications for the brownfield remediation that we would have had to process. So that would have been one way. But I guess my question through you, Mr. Chair, to staff would be, if this site was being developed as one subdivision and we had one owner, would we be approving this incentive?
Well, Mr. Chair, I need to make it clear that, and I stand to be corrected if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that the party before you did not actually do the remediation. They did not undertake the remediation. So our position would be that it is the convention of a program like this for somebody that's considering remediation to come forward to us, make an application. We then bring that application to you, and there's a number of different programs, and we would provide you with a report saying, we believe these tools should be used to assist in the remediation if we believe that any of those tools are appropriate or needed in order to achieve the remediation. You would then consider it. There'd be some sort of business case associated with it. And then you would make a decision as to what amount of money would go towards that party that's doing the remediation. Then they would undertake the remediation. In this case, the party went ahead and the remediation was done by the party, went ahead prior to any kind of application. Then the property was sold to the person or the party that's before you today. So this particular proponent or applicant was not involved in the remediation, but purchased the property after it had been remediated. So in answer to the question, normally, whether it's one developer or several, really wouldn't make a difference. We wouldn't normally be dealing with somebody that's acquired a property and then asking retroactively to get a grant associated with remediation that was done by a previous property owner.
Well, the applicant's been eagerly awaiting to respond to that. As long as it's on point and it's, and you go ahead. Well, you don't want to hear, is that okay?
So just clarification.
If you don't want to hear from him,
Who,
that's
yeah,
fine.
I do, but I'm just trying to get the facts clear. Who owns the property right now? 2423652? And are they the sole owner? And the two parties, Archon and,
This is all through me, right?
okay, the two of them, and who owned it previously and who did the work?
I think that the members up here are completely understanding, and as of this point, nobody has explained, to me, except for staff, has explained to me who owned it, who did the remediation, and who owns it now. And although you were shaking your head, I didn't really understand the explanation. Maybe that'll help.
Thank you. The lands were owned by Archon when the initial application for the brownfield application was submitted. And that was in 2009, October 22nd, 2009, Archon Enterprises Corporation submitted the application. That application was held open. There was absolutely no indication that it was going to be closed at any time. In 2013, 2014, 2423652 is a new company that was created with Archon and Trident. So now Trident is part of the company today that owns the property, as Archon also owns the property. Archon paid the $147,000 in 2009 to clean up the site. Archon is still vested in the project today. It isn't that Trident is a company that's trying to take Archon's money. We are one company together with Archon Enterprises and Trident through the 2423652 number. But, and the difficulty is that the building permits are now being submitted by the home builders of Marlow, Sunlight, and Warrington, not Archon and Trident, or the number.
So the issue, at issue here is you've now sold those lots, is that correct? As a developer, you've sold off the lots, so actually you don't own any of the, you don't actually own that land any longer because the lots have been sold.
I believe there's two lots that the numbered company still owns, but the majority of them have been sold, yes.
I suspect those two lots are for sale. Okay, so we're dealing with a retroactive situation, and Archon, the original owner, applied for the brownfield incentive back somewhere 2009, 2010. Is that, so to staff, through you, Mr. Chair, is that staff's understanding?
So Arcon, the entity Arcon applied for, or made an application for brownfield incentives the way that I described brownfield incentives, saying we would like to rehabilitate the site, we would like it to be according to this configuration. They were required, according to the program, to submit with their application a business case, and we didn't get a business case. So it remained dormant because there was something that the applicant had to do in order for us to bring it to then the Board of Control to receive, to make a recommendation to receive the funding or not receive the funding. Time passed. There was a change in the way the ownership configuration happened, and in 2016, we started again to hear about that application. We don't typically proactively administer applicants' applications. We tell them what they need to submit, and then we go on, we come to you. And so in that transition time, two different areas of planning were administering the program. We were aware of it all the way along, but it was in our files dormant because there was a missing piece of information. So there was a cleanup in somewhere between 2008 and 2010 at the cost, I think it's the same cost that we have, $147,000 and so forth dollars that was undertaken. And that would have been part of the submission, but whether it made business sense for the corporation at the time that they received the application to offer the incentive up to whatever amount the council of the day cared to give would be what we would be talking about. But
Okay.
it didn't happen. Time passed, so we're kind of in this
understand.
conundrum.
Can we go to someone else, please, Deputy Mayor? Anybody else have, let me just see if someone else has a question. Go ahead.
So if we had had the complete business case in 2010, ironically enough, neither Board of Control nor the original company are in existence, but anyhow, if we had had that complete business case in 2010, is it likely that we would have approved the subsidy?
I think from a planning point of view, we might have recommended it, but of course, we have to talk with the Martin Hayward's area as well, because that's why this control exists in the brownfields. They can be pretty hefty asks. So I could only speak for myself.
Okay, other questions? Somebody going to make a motion? Deputy Mayor.
Well, since I'm just kind of punching through and trying to get clarity on this. So here's my feeling on it, and I'll just express it to you, Mr. Chair, and my members of the committee, is and I think we've seen this application before this committee in the last 4 years. I think I have a recollection of 3 times with respect to various issues related to the subdivision and the remediation and the membrane. And am I correct in that? At least several times from a development point of view. Mr. Greyway, is that correct? So I'm remembering the right subdivision. It's been a complicated process, and I'll prepare to move a motion that we would ask, I'm not prepared to make the final decision today, but I would like to ask staff to bring a report back analyzing the business plan as if it was being brought forward by that original entity, recognizing that the current entity includes that original entity. And that in these times, there's been, in the intervening times, given the complexity of it, there's been a change in the ownership configuration, but not the ownership per se, because Arcon is still involved. If Arcon was not involved, my attitude would be significantly different. So I'd like to have a staff report back, Mr. Chair, that looks at that business plan, and as if it was being done by the original ownership, and gives us that information, and at that time, we can consider what our decision would be. So that would be my motion.
Thank you, and just, I think, I don't really have a lot of questions because I think it's pretty clear now that we've had some discussion about the ownership situation, exactly what's happened here. I guess I do have one question for one of the parties that's here. It's too bad that both are not here, but that's fine. There is requirement in the bylaw around the Brownfield CIP and all the programs that are there that they're not going to be given out retroactively. That's been consistent since we started this program. And were you and/or the other party at the time fully aware that these incentives are not granted retroactively?
Through you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not sure, we were not involved in the project. Trident, or the numbered company that was created, came in around 2013. When we were discussing with Archon Enterprises the involvement of the project, there was always the discussion of we have spent $147,000 rehabilitating or remediating the site. That money is going to be coming back to us. We've submitted our brownfield application, and I don't know what discussions Mr. Arts would have had with the city or why he chose to proceed to do that work in advance of. I know it was a rather contentious history attached to this file with the approvals and everything, and at the end of the day, the money was spent, the site was cleaned up. You know, we're estimating about $320,000 being generated in new taxes with the 66 lots now. And Trident, or Don's involvement was, yeah, the cost of our involvement of coming into this project is being, consideration was given that some monies were going to be flowing through for the remediation work that was undertaken. And in 2016, when it was realized there was no business case, because we kept saying, when do we get, or no, how are we going to get our money? Well, you didn't put in a business case. Oh my God. January 2016, a business case was put in, yes, retroactively, but to say the least, the work was done, and we see what the results are as of today with, I believe 15 to 20 building permits, you know, being issued on the development.
I'm going to try one more time. So I realize you can't speak for Archon. So just speaking for Tridon, you're aware of the details of the Brownfield Community Improvement Plan incentives and that they don't apply retroactively? Like, that's something you've known for a long time?
I wasn't aware that it wasn't retroactively. When we read through the entire document, it does not say that you cannot apply or you cannot be seeking retroactively. I believe I don't see that in the incentive program document book.
Okay, so getting to comments. So this is why we don't allow these things to be retroactively applied, is because so many things can change from the time you actually start and do the work to when the development actually happens. That's why we have definitions for the development period and the rehabilitation period, and we're very clear. It's on page 7 of the Brownfield CIP. It says none of the financial incentives in this community improvement plan will be offered retroactively for site investigation, rehabilitation, or development activities undertaken. I realize it's a long document with a lot of things in it, but that's really important. And one of the reasons we do it is because, you know, the lots can be sold off to, and how do you actually make a program like that work? We want to make sure that the incentives are encouraging people to do something that otherwise would not happen in the private market. And I'm going to think about what to do in this specific case. I think it's fair to judge it on its merits, but it seems like a lot of assumptions were made that were wrong. And you know, these are business dealings between a bunch of private parties. I don't know who paid for what, thinking what was going to happen, but the assumption that because there had been discussions about a potential brownfield application that was in progress, even then these things had to come to Board of Control for approval. Assuming that that was going to be approved is probably a bad idea. And I look forward to getting the report back. I'll support it, but I'm not convinced at this point that I'm going to support the idea of paying one of these incentives out many years after the work has actually happened. I understand the situation that you folks are in trying to redevelop the property. I recognize that you're trying to do a good thing for the city and something that's good for your businesses as well. But This is why we put in this piece about it not being retroactively, because so many things can change and it makes it a big mess to try and figure out whether this incentive was really needed in the first place or not. So with those comments, I look forward to hearing what my colleagues have to say on it.
I'm gonna add a part B if I could, sorry, Heather. But I would like to have, at that meeting when this report comes back, a report from our legal staff on any potential exposures with respect to retroactive approvals.
Well, that's coming up, I'll just comment. I'm very close to not voting in favor of the referral back. For me, this is very clear, that the application was not made by the company who did the rehabilitation. The fact that that company has a piece of a new company at law doesn't mean anything, because every corporation is a separate entity. So a separate entity bought the lots, and Councillor Helmer is very right. And I think it's very dangerous to do this retroactively, quite frankly. So I won't be against referral back, but I just want to make it clear that right now, I'm certainly not in favor of paying this out. And then we'll wait for the motion.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 4-0.
Next matter is a delegation funding request from the Hyde Park Business Association. So they're here again. Oh, they're there. Sorry, I was not looking in the right spot. Welcome. Go ahead.
Well, thank you very much for allowing us to have this delegation today and to speak with you about what the Hyde Park Business Association has been up to and what we're requesting. I'm Donna Spikowski. I'm the president of the Hyde Park Business Association, and with me is David Winter. He's with PW Consulting. He's a very active Hyde Park Business Association volunteer. We are here to ask for funding to help us establish a business improvement area under the umbrella of the Hyde Park Business Association, and hope that this presentation will give you a sense of what we're about and where we believe we need to go. The objective of the Hyde Park Business Association is to support entrepreneurs, small, medium, and corporate businesses at a local level, while bringing together area businesses with the community to foster an economically strong and vibrant neighborhood. The Hyde Park Business Association was founded in 2004, incorporated as a nonprofit entity in 2009 by area business members to promote growth and act as a single voice for the Hyde Park business community, and to provide a forum for Hyde Park businesses and managers to network and exchange business ideas. The Hyde Park Business Association has worked over the years to support area businesses as advocates in areas such as rezoning and development, while helping to give businesses a stronger voice with the City of London and with Council. To highlight some of the work that we've done, about 8 years ago, with Walmart moving north to Fanshawe and the area starting to grow, we underwent road construction to upgrade the infrastructure. Sorry, I'm there. This construction cycle proved to be very damaging to the area, with business losses, businesses closing, and overall disruption to the community. As a result, sorry, I'm catching up with my notes, about 2 years before the more recent construction, which that was an election year, we were successful in our ask to our councillor to have the planned 3-year construction process to widen the 2 lanes each way to be brought down to 2 years. And the Hyde Park business area struck the Hyde Park Road Widening Committee at that time, meeting with staff, planners, engineers, and business owners and property owners to help mitigate the anticipated hardship to the area businesses. And while we weren't without our challenges, this communicative approach resulted in a very major construction process that was respectful to businesses and the community. When the media reported that Hyde Park Road was down to 1 lane each way, well, we always were 1 lane each way. The traffic didn't really change too much. So we continue to work with our councillor and staff in acknowledgement of a community petition signed by over 600 residents for a streetlight at South Carriage Road and Hyde Park Road, with a study, I believe, being conducted this fall. And we're very excited that after working with the city, our councillor and the Hampton Group, that the old bridge will be preserved as a walking route for residences, both for their pleasure and for some to reach their transit routes on Sarnia Road. The Hyde Park Business Association works and collaborates with significant involvement from businesses with their time and resources, the City of London, and community members to create a meaningful community space while fostering a sense of community with events such as the Piano Project at the Stormwater Management Pond. As a side note, most of the pics and video you will be seeing were shot by Imagery by Amy, a Hyde Park business donating her time and her services to the community. At this year's event, London's Music Man, Corey Crossman, our Music Industry Development Officer, who is tasked to execute the priorities of the London Music Strategy, joined us in support to say a few words to the community members in attendance. Events and projects like this strengthen the neighborhood while bridging businesses within the community. And music is powerful. Sharing music bridges cultures, languages, and even space itself. The outdoor piano is a fun performing arts feature which residents, young and old, can take advantage of to express themselves and share their creativity with others. And we just wanted to play a short video for you of this piano in action at this summer's launch. It's only about 30 to 40 seconds long, but it gives you a sense of the energy. We had pianist Ely Pazik, I never say his name correctly, help us launch the piano project in 2004. Students from Banting Secondary School Choir during the past year's event. David Weaver, there was a picture that would have come up of him playing during the night of the Hyde Park fire, a very poignant moment when he was playing with the fire going on behind. I thought I'd just also, or we thought we'd also show you a snippet just so you can see. Oh, sorry, there's my pictures. Have a seat. That it's not just for older folks. So that was this summer's piano project, a very important event in the community. And this will be the 6th annual boot drive started by the Hyde Park Business Association, where we engage businesses with boot drop-off points, thus helping to market area businesses, bringing potential clients to their doorsteps. Typically, 200 boots are collected each year. Again, the Hyde Park Business Association facilitates significant collaboration among the businesses and community in Hyde Park. For example, the design and making of the float was made possible with many volunteers. And this last slide, Meet the Hyde Park Business Association's Christmas mascot, fondly called on the parade route, the Rain Dog. But the Hyde Park has and is facing some challenges, as this quarter has literally seen an explosion of new communities, condos and high-rise, along with significant growth occurring with many new businesses in various sectors establishing in Hyde Park. With the 2 intensive rounds of road construction interference, businesses in the area have been operating in more of a preservation mode and now a recovery mode, rather than in positions for growth and revenue generating modes. The Hyde Park Business Association has been successful in achieving positive results for local businesses and the community, and we recognize the far-reaching benefits in operating as a formal BIA, which will allow us to support business growth and retention. In 2015, the Hyde Park Business Association was placed on the Planning Services Work Plan for the fall of 2016. In August, staff and myself, Jim and Carrie, conducted a driving tour of the area, which resulted in the attached map depicting the proposed boundaries for the Hyde Park Business Improvement Area. The proposed boundaries are not very clear on that map, so they're just north of Fanshawe Road, west, including the Industrial Park, North Routledge, south to Sarnia Road at the Sienna Overpass, and east to the other side of Dalmargary Road. So far, we've received much support for the formation of a BIA in Hyde Park. To highlight some comments, as we all know, this area is one of the fastest growing areas in London, therefore the need for a BIA will only increase. And another comment, the development of a Hyde Park BIA is very timely and beneficial to the city, to local businesses and landowners, and to the Hyde Park community. These are more letters from small businesses in the area. And from our community partners, shortened from the letter of the Rotary Club, it is now time for the Hyde Park Business Association to formally become a BIA so that it has the resources to implement future improvement projects, such as the Hyde Park Village, the Hamlet. We are eager for the Hyde Park Business Association to become the newest BIA in London so Hyde Park can continue to grow and thrive as a business family-friendly community. And finally, the Hyde Park Business Association is pleased to have the support from Peggy Sattler, MPP London West, and Kate Young, MP London West. As said by Peggy, this investment by the City of London will have benefits extending to the entire London community, and I strongly urge you to support the Hyde Park Business Association's funding request. As you read elements of our vision, you might be asking, why now? Well, with the completion of the road widening, we feel it's time to take the steps necessary to do the work needed in establishing a BIA. The vision of the Hyde Park Village Hamlet is still very much alive and well, and the Hyde Park Business Association believes that with the structure of a formal BIA, we will have more impact as a collective group of businesses in creating a unique destination retail district that will thrive. Hyde Park can be different than any other area in the city. We have a downtown. We want to create London's uptown with a Hyde Park Hamlet. In so saying, it is already beginning with the soon-to-be-developed lands on the corner of Hyde Park and Gainsborough. HLH Investments, who has told us he is in support of the BIA, shares the vision of creating a Hyde Park Village. This development will start to set the tone for the Hyde Park Village. And with proper planning, the design development can transform Gainsborough Road into a more pedestrian-oriented place and with character that will help make the village a destination place filled with local specialty retail offices and services. And this is the start of it. This is HLH's, an image of HLH's new development that will be going in. Being a BIA, we will have the resources for community beautification initiatives such as Christmas and other holiday lighting on Hyde Park and Gainsborough's roads, Hyde Park branding, and related signage. As a BIA, we will be able to offer education and programs on a variety of subjects, from government funding programs for businesses to hire, community employment programs to business networking meeting and lunch and learns. We are actually working with two potential spaces for the Hyde Park Business Association to live. One is with at the old Hyde Park Schoolhouse on Gainsborough Road with the Focal Point Group, and the other is with HLH Investments. Both would start with leases on November 1st of this year. On behalf of the Hyde Park Business Association, we want to say thank you. Funding the HPB, Hyde Park Business Association, will allow us the resources to begin the process of attaining the BI designation and will allow businesses within the designated area to participate with and give voice to the process. Hyde Park is a community in the midst of growth. A BIA will relieve some of the beautification and community building burden from the municipality, putting the community and the business community in a position to do more. Our ask, respectfully, the Hyde Park Business Association is requesting two motions. I don't know if they're worded correctly, but one is the $50,000 to help us establish the BIA, and the second is to direct staff to take the necessary steps in 2017 towards the creation of the BIA. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions? Or would you like me to let the ward councillor maybe go ahead and set out what his involvement's been? That might be helpful. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair, and I'd be happy to, because certainly, first off, I might add that there's kind of two ward councillors for this area. Councillor Hubert's certainly been an advocate and worked in the area in conjunction with the BIA or the business, Hyde Park Business Association on a number of the initiatives over the years, well before I was on council, so I first recognized that. Second, obviously, I have been involved in the process throughout, and as it was a matter on the planning committee's business plan, this is something that we were expecting to come forward as a council. It's been on the work plan scheduled for this fall. I think that there are three reasons to consider supporting the requests, including the request for funding. First off, we've done this before with the Argyle Association. $50,000 request was made by the business association or group of businesses in Argyle who wanted to get together and grow and work towards establishing a BIA, work towards the levy vote. And council granted $50,000 to assist them in that. They spent a year working towards that goal and were successful in achieving what is a self-sufficient BIA area, which is, I think is important to note, that is also the goal of the Hyde Park Business Association, is to be self-sufficient. Two, it's a small investment now that has the potential to lead to significant investments in the area later at no cost to the taxpayer. We help this organization of volunteers, and it is an organization of volunteers, establish themselves a little more formally and work towards a vote that, if successful, will lead to businesses investing money back into that area of the city to support other businesses. And that's important because, three, Hyde Park, as was mentioned, is very unique. It is an area of the city that combines the largest of retailers with smart centers in the BIA zone with the smallest of independent owners, tiny little shops that are just starting out and service a small clientele, and having a strong, robust business improvement area to meet the needs of both of those groups, I think is important, and a BIA will allow them with a great range of tools to meet the needs of a large, diverse clientele, to set up potentially mentoring programs and a number of other things even beyond the scope of what they've mentioned in their proposal. And with the proposal, I know that they've scoped out a plan. I think with engagement over the next year of the business community in the development of BIA, they will have a much better sense on what the business community wants of a BIA, and they will decide whether it will be successful or not. So I think helping them out is appropriate. I think certainly the second part of this motion, directing staff to work with them on this, I hope the committee supports. I will say, as you know, colleagues, I'm a person who always asks about source of financing. So when I first heard of this, I said, we're going to need a source of financing, because otherwise people like me will say, what's the source of financing? And I talked to the treasurer about this, and you may have heard me mention this back during the budget process, that these sorts of requests were coming forward and we'd need to know where to get the money from. The treasurer suggested two possible sources of financing to be targeted for the $50,000. One was the operating budget contingency reserve. As you know, halfway through the year, we're tracking about a $4.5 million surplus. There's going to be capacity in the budget contingency reserve to support this. That was the source of financing in the Argyle request, so that was one that was suggested for consistency. The other he suggested is the Community Investment Reserve Fund, which was council's reserve fund that they established through the surplus policy to make investments into the community. This seems like something that would fit with at least the name of that fund, to invest back into the community, give it a chance to create further investments that would be much greater than the initial investment the city would make down the road. So those would be my comments. I'm happy to also answer any questions I could of the committee, and I look forward to the discussion and debate.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor?
Thank you. And this group has worked really hard. And, if it was a Johnny-come-lately kind of group that was just kind of appearing on the horizon, I think I would say go away and do some more work. But they've been at it for well over 10 years and really working in a selfless way. I think their successes are pretty obvious through their presentation. And I think one of the interesting things is when we look at our strategic plan, we talk about business development and small business development. And this is, for the most part, well, with the exception of maybe Lowe's and Walmart, it's generally small businesses, and that's where the focus of growth and development is. And I think it's really a high probability that they will be self-sufficient. I'm so glad Councillor Morgan answered the question before I asked it, what's the source of financing? Thanks, Josh, for that. But I would like to suggest, Mr. Chair, and I will move a motion. And I guess one question of clarity, first of all, is when does the association see the 50,000 starting in terms of when, because the levy wouldn't come in until 17. So I don't want them to get in a situation where they have to gap somehow between the funds available through the levy at a future time, should the levy be approved, and operating. That can be a real killer for a startup. So if I could ask that question, then I'll come back to my motion.
We're hoping if the funding is approved, that we receive it in time to start paying rent November 1. I'm of the understanding that should staff be directed to do the work necessary to help us create the BIA, that it will likely be in place in the late fall of 2017.
That answers my question. So I'll move a motion that would approve the 50,000, but I really want it to come from the Community Investment Reserve Fund. I don't like it coming from, I know it's one-time money, I don't like it coming from the operating contingency reserve. It's community investment refer, and it's better when we fund things out of a fund that's actually created to do exactly that. So I'll move that motion and look for a seconder.
Get the motion on the floor, and then the rest, somebody else can. I think Councillor Park wanted to speak. If it does get seconded. You're going to move it? Is there a seconder? Go ahead, ask a question before we do anything further.
Thank you. And through the chair to staff, one of the biggest things of a BIA is to work the incentives that the City of London offers. Can anyone answer what potential incentives are available now, knowing that there's not exactly a community improvement plan with incentives in the area?
Excuse me, right now, only the citywide available incentives would be available to Hyde Park. So the Heritage Community Improvement Plan, brownfields, those kinds, but no specific upgrade to building code loans or anything like that.
I'll go over to the committee first, now I'll come back to you. Councillor Helmer.
Thanks very much. And first I want to start by saying I'm generally supportive of the idea of granting money to the Hyde Park Business Association so they can try and start up a BIA. I think it's a good idea and a kind of natural progression. That being said, I do have a bunch of questions, and most of them are about the business plan. So can you give me a sense of what your budget is now for the Hyde Park Business Association?
0.
Okay, so the year one budget, so November to 2017, until November 2017, it looks fairly reasonable. Like it does, in fact, it seems a little bit low, that you might need a bit more money than that, but you know, you're not asking for more money than that, and you're obviously doing a lot with nothing now, so that's quite impressive. I had one piece of feedback on it, which was over time, you're gonna have to replace these assets that you're gonna buy, like furniture and computers and things like that. And one of the things I've seen in BIAs is that it's all operating, and then you don't have a whole lot set aside for capital replacement. So just something to keep in mind. It's obviously not a big deal in the first year, and you don't have a huge ton of assets to replace anyway, but something to keep in mind. For year 2, 3, 4, what are you imagining? If you're successful in getting the levy, where do you think the revenue side and the expenditure side will be? Because we just have in front of us just the income and expenses for the first year.
We are in the midst of understanding what the levy could be, so we don't yet have those numbers. But our budget will be based on what the community needs and wants in terms of beautification, events, and the like. So we would be building, first and foremost, those costs in. Then, of course, you're going to have rent, salaries, and operating expenses. But I think that the main purpose of the BIA is to act as a vehicle to better the Hyde Park business, the Hyde Park area. Yeah.
Okay, so year two, sort of to be determined, once you get a sense of how much can be raised through the levy. Is it your intention to have in year two virtually all of the revenue coming from the levy? Or are you looking at other sources of financing, the municipality? You have here a grant, it looks like, from the Ministry of Training, Colleges, and Universities. Are you looking at other sources of funding for year two?
Yeah, we will look at drawing funding where possible from the Ministry of, not the Ministry of Labor, what was Service Canada, summer job programs and the like, yes.
Could you tell me what this income line in here about the Ministry of Training, Colleges, and Universities is referring to? It says in progress. Can you give me a sense of how in progress it is?
I was hoping to have an answer as to the result of that. We did a funding proposal to the ministry to request a part-time position to help us in the next, I think it's a 24, 28-week program where they would pay the salary of another individual. So there'll be two of us working on this.
Okay, so for the benefit of my colleagues, and they would know this from budget time, I don't want to be too problematic, but I don't like the idea of it being financed from the Community Investment Reserve Fund. And the reason for that is that this, despite us having established it in the budget, it still doesn't have any kind of mandate or specifics about what it's for. It's just words in a report saying we're going to have a Community Investment Reserve Fund. It is frankly, we should have done that already, and maybe this would be very well, and seems to be well suited to what the words of the Investment Reserve Fund are called. But until that is established, I don't want to start funding things from it. And we have money available in the operating budget contingency reserve. I think it's just very reasonable to use that to establish it. If you insist on using the Community Investment Reserve Fund, I'm going to vote against it for that specific reason. I just think it's not a good practice to be approving money from a fund that doesn't have any description or purpose at this point.
Deputy Mayor?
Well, not that I want to spend a great deal of time straining gnats because it's all one taxpayer's pocket, but in the absence of policy, practice defines the policy. So by funding this in practice, we actually begin to define the policy. So I'd rather have a unanimous if I'd rather have my colleague voting with me. So that's just my view of it. But, you know, since I'm such an agreeable guy, I'd be pleased to just end the sentence after the period funding, and we'll allow the city treasurer to determine where it comes from. How's that? We'll have to back our post out to edit it.
I am sitting here, you know, like the chair is here, and you guys are talking to each other, but,
I'm looking at it.
okay.
I'm looking at you too, Phil.
Okay, so what are we doing here? Does somebody who made the motion want to make an amendment? Is that what? Councillor Helmer?
I think you should say operating budget contingency reserve. That's the other source of financing that through Councillor Morgan, the treasurer said was okay. I'm fine with that one. I don't think leaving
Let's make
it.
that change if it's a friendly amendment.
Little flex, little flip. Oh, whatever. I just want to get the 50 grand going. Okay, fine.
Once again, I am sitting here. It is a committee, you know, all this,
Yeah, through the
excellent,
through the chair.
excellent.
Through the chair.
Okay, well, that amendment's being made, and nothing hinges on this, but I'm just really curious about this. You were here several months ago when we designated a property as a heritage property on the development site of this developer who's renting you land. Has there been any consideration that one of the things the business improvement area might do is get together with the business area and try to find a use for this property rather than seeing what we so often see, which is a heritage building sort of slowly deteriorating? And maybe, again, no condition on this, but maybe in the future it might be a great place for the business improvement area to be. Just an idea.
Yes, we have talked about that. I know that there's funds out there, sort of, for preserving heritage dwelling buildings. But that's part of what one of our focuses is to work closely with developers and builders in the hopes of creating a community that looks great, and that includes heritage designations. But I don't know for sure yet what the move forward will be, but.
The only reason I want to speak, Chair, and through the chair, is it was mentioned that there aren't any other incentives in this area, but I do want to mention that the proposed area also includes one of the cities, and people don't know this about Northwest London, industrial sites as well. So it actually has an industrial component to it. So not only is it small and large businesses, but there's an industrial area up in that northwest corner of the city, and there are different programs available for industrial areas. So so there are some other considerations with funding. I think Councillor Park asked the question, so.
And I'm going to give Councillor Park a chance to speak now. She actually asked me if she could speak, so I'm going to let her speak.
Well, thank you, Chair. So I'm going to be supportive of this. My positive concern was about the building code, oh my gosh, pardon me, I'm not feeling very well today. The incentives that are available through other BIAs through community improvement plans. I think that there's still some work to do perhaps in that regard, in having a community improvement plan there in the future. I know we've got a long work plan ahead of us in regards to we're going citywide, but in the future, perhaps that's something we can consider. I think what we have in the City of London is a lot of really great BIAs, and I know that most of the leadership in those will be very keen to facilitate in, learning how the various programs work, how you can work within the confines of the Municipal Act and all those sorts of things. So I think that you guys have a lot of really strong community support, and I look forward to seeing the work that you'll do in the future.
This is a comment through to our staff when I know eventually there'll be a report that comes forward to actually establish the BIA once we get to that point. Given the specific nature of the properties in this area, you have some really big property owners and some very small ones. I'm hoping that we'll look at, I know there's the ability to put a maximum on, the contributions under the levy. Sometimes it's just you're this percentage of the assessment base, so you pay this much. Sometimes, depending on how the configurations are, that can be really weird for one particular property owner or two, and sometimes it's not a big deal and they're fine with it. But I hope we'll look at that because unlike, say, the main street in Old East Village, where a lot of the properties are similarly sized and have similar assessments, you've got a pretty big range out in Hyde Park, and I hope the report will address that kind of concern. I think it's important to get the buy-in from the community. I'm sure the business association will do a great job selling the idea of a BIA.
But just an offer, I happen to have some extra office furniture and equipment. Come and see me. Your budget may have just gone.
Anything further? Okay, I'll call the vote.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 4-0.
Thank you very much for the presentation and all the best of luck to you. I'm sure you'll do a great job.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Moving on now to item number 9, which is a public participation meeting regarding a request for demolition of heritage listed properties at 479 to 485 and 487 and 489 Talbot Street by Rygar Properties. We'll have to open the public participation meeting. Any discussion? Calling the vote?
Closing the vote, the motion carries 4-0.
Mr. Yanchula, how many, is Latch also presenting or just you? Just you? Okay, go ahead.
Thank you. This is, the specific item before you today is the request for demolition that is made under the Ontario Heritage Act for a listed or set of listed properties. Obviously, there have been other applications that have been before you that this relates to. It is council's practice to have a public participation meeting when potential demolitions of listed properties come about. And that's why we're here today, because this is that opportunity. Just to make sure that everybody in the building and those who may be watching through video, where these properties are located here on the west side of Talbot Street, north of Fullerton Street. In relationship to the Downtown Heritage Conservation District, they are not in the Downtown Heritage Conservation District. The big black arrow points to the place that they are outside of the boundary to the north. That area where the arrow sort of appears on the screen is one of the potential areas that is in our list of heritage potential conservation areas called Heritage Places that is suggested for future study for Heritage Conservation District. The properties that we're speaking about today under these various addresses are basically 6 townhouse units that are shown in these 3 photos joined together. I didn't have one straight on view because I couldn't get far enough back to take it all together. To go through the chronology, which we always do, and which I think is a little bit different than it usually is, I think is important here. So these properties have been listed on our Inventory of Heritage Resources, which we now call the Register, in London since 1991. And the only indications of why they're on the register or the inventory are quoted as Italian influence and the name Camden Terrace. And there's been prior presentations to PEC and elsewhere where we've described these in a lot of detail. Recommendations came from Latch for the designation of these properties on September 9th of last year and July 6th of this year. Latch has been monitoring this in the course of the zoning bylaw amendment application that was also pertaining to these subject properties. I didn't proofread. July shouldn't be written there. Anyway, the request for demolition was actually initiated August 16th, 2016. And that's significant because the Heritage Act allows you 60 days to make a decision on the demolition, or else it's deemed to be okay to demolish. We sent out area notification letters twice on this property due to the sequence of events on the recommendations that came before PEC for the zoning bylaw amendment. So there's been double the amount of notification that there would normally be on this particular demolition. Likewise for the notices of public meeting in the Londoner. The consultation that we have to do within that 60 days happened at the Latch meeting on September 16th. PEC received the Latch report, and that's why Latch isn't here today. And then that Latch report went through to council. So the recommendation on the demolition is, as you see it before you here, and is also written in the council report. Latch has been consistent in recommending designation and does not consent to the demolition. So the requirement to consult with Latch under the Heritage Act has been met. If you were to decide to designate under the Heritage Act, you would do so under Regulation 906, which has 3 main areas of justification for designation: design values, historic associations, and contextual values. And we usually present a chart that would end up being a statement of cultural value, heritage value, and significance to you, but we've gone beyond that to actually produce the statement of cultural heritage value and significance. It's attached to your report. It was attached to prior reports, so I didn't go backwards and fill out a table just for the sake of filling out a table. When Latch and Latch's Stewardship Committee spent a lot of time putting together an actual statement. As you're aware, and has been written in the report, we also have other guidance policy direction for our downtown, and this is included in our downtown, and that is how heritage sizes up to everything else that happens downtown. It is one of our core 9 values in our Move Forward London's Downtown Plan, and the policy direction stated there is when planning for new development, integration with the existing heritage will be a foremost consideration. I believe that if you go back in the narratives that have happened already on this, you'd see that council's given us that direction with some sense of that policy, because we have 2 strategic directions that are listed there, 5.1 and 5.5, that tells us how we might deal with heritage in the context of development downtown. I don't need to read them out for everyone to see them, but the downtown plan does mention them. What council then did is took Latch's recommendations for designation, and consistent with that, referred them to Civic Administration to be considered in conjunction with the evaluation of the planning applications that you saw earlier last month. And we were requested and did our utmost to evaluate opportunities to integrate those heritage elements in the design of the redevelopment that you saw at the zoning bylaw amendment stage. That zoning bylaw amendment that was passed on by council on September 13th was a very long one, but the clauses that are operative to today's discussion about demolition are that there was a bonus zone that was recommended, or sorry, that was approved. And through the bonus zone, there were several facility services or matters listed in it, one of which was to do some heritage conservation, not at the properties under consideration today. Those were instead on 9395, which was part of Dufferin, which was part of the larger development site. But it was agreed to in the one of the listed matters for the bonus zone to commemorate Camden Terrace, and there was much discussion on that. So I won't go back, but just to say that there would be a commemoration recreating depiction of Camden Terrace with original materials. And in order to do that, we would need to have proper drawings done up so that we knew exactly what the dimensions were and so forth. So today's decision is either recommend designation, which would be contrary to the zoning bylaw amendment that was passed earlier last month, or to consent to demolition. Noting that we have a very site-specific development proposal, noting that we have the bonus zone taking steps in compliance with the policies that apply here to integrate heritage to the extent that we have agreed to, our recommendation will be to remove the properties from the inventory, making sure that the CBO is knowledgeable about that. And the other two, Part C and Part D, that we would provide, ask the applicant to provide the measured drawings that we need to understand exactly what Camden Terrace's dimensions were, and that during demolition, again, consistent with the zoning bylaw amendment, that the applicant undertake to salvage and store original materials and elements so that they can be used in the commemoration of Camden Terrace. These recommendations were before you in the zoning bylaw amendment, but we think it's important to have them in the staff recommendation on the potential demolition. That's a snapshot for you to begin your consideration of this matter.
Thank you very much. Any technical questions from the committee? Councillor Helmer?
Thank you. Under the Ontario Heritage Act, it's possible for the municipal council to consent to the demolition of a designated property, correct?
Yeah, even of a designated property.
All right, we're going to go to public participation now, and we're going to start up on the right. If you'd like to address us, let us just need your name and address. Although I should remember it, I just don't.
I'm Benjamin Vasquez. I live at 416 English Street in Old East Village. I feel that nearly everything that needs to be said about this property has already been said, and I'm sure this is a development that those of you down in the chambers are getting sick of hearing about. I can assure you that those of us up in the galleries are getting sick of talking about it. But this is really an extraordinarily important property. This is reminiscent of Samuel Peters, London's first architect. This is one of the very few surviving Victorian terraces in the city. And this is a property that needs to be incorporated into the development in a more effective fashion. I don't think anyone up here is opposed to the development in some form. Indeed, I think that extra density for our downtown is an extraordinarily valuable thing. And most of the parts of what we're looking at here, most of us, myself especially, are extraordinarily excited about. But we feel that it would be possible to incorporate the heritage better into the development development that's being proposed. And we feel that the value of the structure that we're looking at here is sufficiently great to encourage the designation of the property as a heritage property now, and alterations to be made to it through heritage alteration permits as the opportunity arises. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Moving along then, anyone else through the middle? Over to this side if you'd like to speak. Now is the time. Ms. Miller.
Thank you, Councillor.
I don't know your address, which you're probably really happy about, I'm sure.
I know where you live. Sandra Miller, 32 Upper Avenue, a postmodern heritage house. Happy World Architecture Day to everyone here, in case you didn't know. To reiterate what Mr. Vasquez said, I'm not going to get into details about the value of this property. I think we've all read and seen and heard a lot about the heritage value. So that's an obvious statement. I have obviously serious concerns about this proposed demolition. I would really not want to see it go through at all. I am very excited about the potential for development downtown. There's so many empty lots that are just begging for development, including the back part of this lot. And I still believe that a lot of the original part of this building could be incorporated into a new high-rise or mid-rise or whatever. One of my really serious concerns is that this designation was not addressed 13 months ago when it first came down. As you know, the Latch recommendation, there wasn't even talk of demolition at the time. It came down as a very standalone recommendation for designation. It's been on the inventory for some time. And the recommendation should have been addressed, and heritage designation requests and recommendations, in my feeling, and most people in the heritage community and probably a lot of individuals would say that heritage recommendations should be addressed on their own as a standalone issue. I think that we've gotten into a habit, and I know it's not come from this council individually, it's sort of become a precedence. And I'm not sure if there's a feeling that it helps to have them both on the table, a development proposal and a heritage recommendation at the same time. There may be a feeling that having them as part of the same conversation helps to bring together a better proposal in the end. Personally, I feel that we end up inevitably in a divide and conquer scenario. We live in a culture where it's hard to incentivize things like heritage value, et cetera, the nuanced case. I mean, every heritage designation, every heritage property is going to be a different scenario. So talking about development and heritage on the same table is a nice thought, but I think inevitably it boils down to a heritage versus development, much to the delight of our colleagues in the media who do like to use that analogy, much to the frustration of many of us who try to present a more nuanced discussion. And I think it doesn't serve London or Londoners very well, because we end up, unfortunately, right back in these kind of scenarios where you guys are in the unfortunate decision-making process of having to choose between one or the other, and I don't think we need to be in that position. So if I can say anything, I would say, obviously, designate this building and the Dufferin buildings, but for future reference, I would really strongly urge that heritage issues be addressed on their own as individual properties, assessed on their own values as they should be, as opposed to compared to a proposed development of hundreds of millions of dollars, because inevitably heritage seems to lose out. And I'm not sure exactly why. That may be partly because the city is also responsible for allowing these properties to deteriorate. Camden Terrace is certainly not alone. There are a number of heritage listed and designated properties across the city that are in not great condition. They're technically protected, but they're not actively protected. And if the owners don't want to take care of them, they fall into deterioration over a period of many, many years. This isn't just a one-off short-term occurrence. So I hope that you'll take that into consideration for future scenarios. And that's all I have to say. Good luck in your decision-making.
Thank you very much. Anybody else in this area that wishes to speak? Yep, go ahead, Tom. Oh. We'll go down here first, and then we'll come back up to.
Hi, I am Kelly McKeating, and I live at 329 Victoria Street, a house that is now in the heritage designation application process, as is the income property that my husband and I own. I'm going to start by stating the obvious. Camden Terrace didn't wake up one morning, stretch a little bit, and say, I think I'm going to grow some mold this morning, and while I'm at it, I'm going to crack my foundation. The building did not deteriorate itself. Owners, both recent owners and owners over the last few decades, allowed it to deteriorate. In granting this demolition permit, as I expect that you will, you're going to be rewarding the developer for his neglect of a heritage property that has been listed as priority 1 in the city's inventory since 1991. And the developer is not paying any sort of a price for allowing the building to deteriorate. I am quite certain that it is highly probable that had the city said, okay, we're going to not designate the building and we're going to let you demolish this so that you could build exactly the building you want with absolutely no constraints. But instead of kicking in $250,000 to the public art program, it's going to have to be $1.25 million to the public art program. I think that all of a sudden the experts would have said, oh, gee, the foundation isn't really as bad as we thought it was. We've taken another look. The soil contamination guy would have said, oh, we've taken some additional samples. This isn't really quite as bad. And all of a sudden, the building would have been preserved. It would have been included in the development. We're never going to know whether I'm right or not, but I'm pretty sure that I am right. For the record, in terms of learning lessons from this, I want to read a little bit from the email that I sent to you all late last night. The developer is certainly not the only one to blame as we look at how we got to this unfortunate place. City staff, with respect, failed dismally in enforcing the city's own property standards bylaws, despite being made aware on a regular basis for more than 2 years that the property was being neglected and permitted to deteriorate. Vacant properties should be heated during the winter, period. Vacant properties should be secured against intruders in the weather, period. If a property owner is not willing to take those basic steps, then the city should do it for them without delay. Ask once, don't ask 4 times. Don't ask 20 times. If the property owner won't reimburse the city for the related costs, then the property should be expropriated and sold to someone who is willing to take better care of our heritage resources. Starting today, I would like to see the city take a more proactive stance against neglect of its heritage structures. As a taxpayer, business owner, and resident of the city, who's going to get a sip of water here? I expect better than what has happened here. I would like the city to take an active, assertive stance in the protection of the heritage resources that make London a pleasant place to live, work, and play in. I'd like the city to begin an aggressive program to designate, with or without the owner's consent, all of the priority 1 properties in the heritage inventory as promptly as can be managed. And once that's done, I'd like the city to move on to priority 2 properties. London should accept only the highest standard of development in its urban cores, and that necessarily includes the preservation and incorporation of heritage structures which does appear to occur routinely in other cities. I was in Toronto last week at a conference and walking along the street. I wasn't taking detours, I wasn't looking, and boof in front of me, there's a sign saying we're going to build, there's a plan here to rezone, put in a 57-story building, and the heritage building currently on the site will be largely retained. The rest of my walk in, it was about a 10-minute walk to the conference. I looked around and I saw another couple of developments. And these aren't, high-profile thing. They're not the ones that you heard about last month when, at your September 6th meeting, but this is the way things seem to get done very routinely in other cities. And I would like the culture, just the way of approaching these things to change in the City of London. I also want to remind council and city staff that experts retained by a developer do have a vested interest. And there's a very sad lesson from Elliott Lake where a structural engineer told his client what the client wanted to hear, and 2 people died. No one's going to die here. But I think that we all need to recognize that experts may not be independent, they may not be unbiased, and I would have liked to have seen both city staff and council be more skeptical of the information that was provided to them. To be fair, what I heard from city staff at the PEC meeting on the 6th of September and then also at the September 13 council meeting was that Camden Terrace was repairable and that city staff was not planning to order a demolition. However, council did accept Rygar's contention that the building was not repairable or that it was too expensive to repair. When asked by councillors, what I heard staff say, to paraphrase them, was, "We have no reason to disbelieve the opinions of Rygar's experts, but we've not conducted an independent assessment of the building or the site." And that's a far cry from, we agree with what Rygar's experts have to say, but I think that unfortunately many councillors heard the latter and not the former. I'd like to reiterate what other people said, what Sandra Miller said. This is not an either-or question. Those of us who have advocated for the preservation of Camden Terrace have been nearly unanimous in advocating for its inclusion in the development. This would have made the development more appealing to those who will live and work in it and to those who will have to look at it every day when they go out about their business downtown. Inclusion probably would have made the development more profitable to the proponent. Only the proponent, sadly lacking in design imagination, saw Camden Terrace as a hindrance rather than an opportunity. Next time, please don't let a developer's lack of imagination win over the best interests of Londoners.
Thank you. Come down to the microphone. Thank you.
My name is Mark Tovey, and I live at 205 Sydenham Street. Much of the discussion at the September 6th PEC hinged on the condition of the property, hinged on the condition of Camden Terrace. And absent consideration of condition, there seems to be broad agreement that Camden Terrace merits designation under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. And also in the PEC meeting of September 6th, 2016, as I understood it, staff from Property Standards confirmed in response to an inquiry from a councillor that Camden Terrace could be demolished, but also could be repaired. The tests documented in the environmental report were not performed under Camden Terrace itself. As I read it, at any rate, there are no environmental tests that confirm that the area below Camden Terrace requires remediation. Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act states that designation is based on physical design value, historical associative value, and contextual value. Under the Ontario Heritage Act, building condition is not a criterion for designation under the Ontario Heritage Act. I would encourage PEC to designate Camden Terrace and make necessary alterations to Camden Terrace through the Heritage Alteration Permit process. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. Other speakers in the middle? Anybody still in that area? Okay, nobody in that area left? Okay. I know she is up there and wishes to speak. I'm looking over at this area. Nobody left in there, okay. Would you like to speak now?
My name is Janet Hunton, 253 Huron Street. We are urging designation at this time so that council will have some control over the future. And was a great deal of talk years ago about demolition permits not being granted until site plan approval had been achieved. And this was to avoid the proliferation of parking lots in the downtown area. We are looking at a project that will take a minimum of 7 years to complete, according to the developer's own prospectus. And we would like to see control here until such time as shovels could go in the ground. Now, demolition, or partial demolition, is not being opposed of the back part of this property. We are looking to preserve the main front area, and which is the streetscape part. The talk about contamination, the nearest borehole on the reports was more than 30 feet from any corner of the building. And the much talked about foundries and gas stations, dry cleaners were on Fullerton Street, and the dry cleaner was across from the Baptist Church on farther north on Talbot. So we don't expect to see those contaminating this site, which was built on virgin ground. City directories tell us there were no buildings on this site before the Camden Terrace buildings. So the contaminated fill is not where these buildings are located. It's under the parking lots at the back. Those of us who admire these buildings can envision a facade that is partly glass and partly the human scale of these buildings, to contrast with the glass on the other side of the street. That could be accomplished through integrating these buildings with the future facade. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else in this area here who wishes to speak? No? Okay. Anybody else from the public wish to speak? Going once, going twice. We will close the public participation meeting. Anything further? Call the vote.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 4-0.
The one issue I wonder if we could get clarification, and it's come up since the last meeting, is where the soil contamination is. In other words, there's an issue, it appears, that whether there is soil contamination under Camden Terrace, and I wonder if someone could address that. That would be very helpful in terms of that. And then there's also an issue about what our staff said to us about the ability to repair these buildings, and maybe you could clarify those two issues.
On the matter of the soil condition reports, we typically take all of the technical reports that are engineering based and see if we have anybody in-house who can help us understand them, since planners aren't allowed to practice outside of their professional area of expertise. And we don't have anybody in our planning department who did that. We attempted to do that within the boundaries of, or within the staff citywide, and we don't. Typically, we don't, because we, the answer I was given was, we take care of municipal property. So our engineering staff who have expertise in soil conditions, for example, do so on municipal property, but don't give secondary opinions to other consultants on private property. So frankly, I myself and my heritage staff do not review soil conditions reports in coming to a conclusion about the heritage value of any property. I don't know if that is satisfactory. If you have a follow-up, I'd be happy.
If that's your
to
answer,
give it.
that's your answer. So is the answer you don't know?
I have no expertise in reviewing soil reports.
Mr. Kotsifas, I was asking you on the second point which was about the condition of the building, because you can appreciate people are now saying, well, it can be repaired.
Through the chair, I believe what we said at the time of the meeting, and I can have Mr. Kokoris add to this, but the condition of the building obviously is deteriorated. We know that. There's an engineering report to that effect. It needs a lot of work. It's not in a condition that it would warrant me ordering a demolition, and I think I said that at the previous meeting as well. So can it be repaired? I think anything can be repaired. It's a matter of feasibility, and that would be up to the proponent to take that on. But it's an old building, just like old cars. They rust and they need, sometimes they get to a point where they've deteriorated to a point where it may not be practical to repair. But in this case, it's not in a condition that it would warrant me ordering a demolition. And it's up to the proponent to determine whether or not it's feasible to repair.
And the applicant doesn't have any of their experts here to address these issues today? Do you feel you can address those issues? I mean, I don't know if the committee's interested, but I am, since they've been raised.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. Is this on? I can address the soils issues, as I hired the engineers to undertake the studies and reviewed the studies that they did. We drilled over a dozen boreholes on the property throughout various locations. We did phase 2 environmental studies on all the properties. So they're individual properties right now. The titles have not merged. We did phase 2 on each and every property. We did not go in to the buildings and drill through the floors, but we did do studies around each of the properties, and it was consistent. The contaminants consistent throughout all the properties on the whole site. It was for that reason that we made the assumption, well, two reasons. That reason that we made the assumption that the contaminants are likely under the buildings, since they're beside and around all of the buildings. So that was the first part to it. And secondly, in the phase 1 portion of the environmental, you do the study of the history of it, and the history of the property was, in fact, it was foundry in there, which explains why there weren't buildings on it back in the mid-1800s when it was first built. So it's consistent with the contamination throughout there.
And the repairability of the building, the second issue? Do you have anything?
Well, the repairability really, I suppose the gentleman is correct. If you spend enough money on anything, on something, probably anything can be done. I think most engineers would tell you that. But from a feasibility point of view of trying to support these structures, take the soil out from underneath, somehow build new foundations while holding up the buildings, it just was so impractical that you get to a point where you simply don't consider, would we spend $10 million to do that? Well, we certainly wouldn't, and I don't think most sane people would.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks very much, Chair, and unfortunately now I have a follow-up question for Mr. Rogers. I think that you said that the boreholes were all done, and unfortunately I don't have the big document you gave us all with all the details in front of me, and I should frankly have it in front of me, but I think you said they were done all around the buildings, and I just wanted to verify very explicitly, did you do every side of this building, or just over on the parking lot side and not out by the street, for example?
Okay. If we start from the north, we did the laneway between Hakeem property, the Hakeem building and 489 Talbot. So we did a borehole in there, maybe two. I haven't got it in front of me either. We did in behind 93, 95 Dufferin. We went down up against 100 Fullerton. We went along the back side of all the townhouses, did a number of boreholes there. And then we did quite a number of boreholes in the rear of 100 Fullerton and in the parking lot. And it was in the parking lot that was an old gas station that was the most suspect originally, where we did find underground storage tanks and chemical spill. Same in behind 100 Fullerton, but then as we started going north, that's where we found the other contaminants. So all around, but we didn't go inside and open up buildings and do that.
And also you didn't do on the Talbot side street of the buildings?
Well,
It's in the public right of way?
Not in the public right of way, no. Those buildings sit on the property line, so it wasn't for us to do that.
My second question is for the property owner is about, you said the findings were very consistent all over the site. And my understanding, just remembering what was in the report, was on the one section, I think of 3 or 4 buildings, the soil contamination was at a much shallower level than on the other 2 where it was deeper. So down to 3 meters rather than a meter. And so not consistent even within the space of those 6 buildings.
Well, thanks for pointing that out. Consistent in that it's the same type of contamination that runs throughout, but not consistent to the depths. The depth runs from 6.5 meters in the fuel tank to about 1.5 meters, I think, in some areas. Generally, the majority is around 3.5 meters throughout the site. So there is some variations as the testing goes throughout, but it's consistent that there's contamination throughout.
Questions from the committee? Deputy Mayor?
I have a couple. I guess I want to be, when we consider these things, I want to be fair, and I have stood in this very chamber and made comments about demolition by neglect. But to be fair, this proponent didn't own it. So I think it's unfair in a sense to tag him with that label, per se. Secondly, engineers, architects, and other professionals have their code of ethics, and they're required, regardless of the property or who owns it or whatever, to follow that code of ethics. So I always want us to be a little careful and mindful of impugning people's professional standards just because we don't like what they say. My questions are as follows. Is there a site plan? Has there been a site plan filed? I'll just list them and then through you, staff can answer. Secondly, and what I don't want to see, I guess, and if there has been a site plan filed, and there is, and I hate the word demolition because what I see described here is actually deconstruction to some degree, is if there's a site plan, what would be the timeline for drawing a building permit and the beginning of building? Because I'll tell you what I absolutely don't want is I don't want a building coming down and then it's sitting empty and then us having an application for a parking lot. I mean, that's what I absolutely don't want that. And as our staff have pointed out, to vote against this, it's actually contrary to a decided matter of council. So we have little options, but There are some things that I have in my mind that we can do. So those are my two questions, Mr. Chair, is through you to staff, has there been a site plan filed? If not, when will there be one? And if yes, when would we see shovels in the ground?
Someone going to take that on?
Through the chair, there has not officially been a site plan filed. There's been consultation regarding the site plan. I'm not sure the applicant's here. He may speak to when the actual application for site plan will be made. With respect to the site plan process, the site plan process will at the end of the day yield an approval for site plan, which would then yield the ability to take out a building permit or apply for a building permit. There's no assurance that even with successful site plan approval that I can't force somebody to take out a building permit, let me put it that way. So although they will get site plan approval, they could even apply for a building permit, they could even obtain a building permit, but at the end of the day, there's no assurance that the building, I can't force somebody to build that building, if that's what you're asking.
And therein lies our rub, right? Assurances. And you know, one of the things, Mr. Chair, that drives me crazy at planning meeting is I have to make decisions based on planning merits. And I'd rather make decisions based on pro formas and business plans and using, you know, those sorts of skill sets. And it really drives me crazy because I'd rather act like you're you know, Rygaard's banker and look at the business plan and say, what probability do we have that this development will go forward, and seeing more of that, more broader scope. So those are always the challenges that we face. And I think that's part of what the general public doesn't understand is we have these limited tools which we can use at this point. And through you, Mr. Chair, to Mr. Kosovitz, there's nothing we can do to tie the request for a demolition to a site plan or anything like that. We can't make it conditional upon or anything like that.
Sorry, we were just conferring, but if it was a designated property, I believe there's provisions under the Heritage Act that you can attach conditions to your approval for demolition. But in absence of that, I don't believe there's any ability. There's definitely none under the Building Code Act to assign conditions to the demolition.
Councillor Park?
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. And last month when we discussed this, it was still a very difficult decision for me to make, and balancing on the needs of a growing downtown and a well-populated downtown. And if we think about what downtown looked like 10 years ago, it's much different than it looked like today. And council's making a lot of very different decisions back then. And they're making decisions about how do we get where we are today. This council has made decisions around heritage protection and went so bold as to place an HER designation on 183 King Street. And that's something that this councillor still gets angry emails about. And I want to reiterate, this is personally a very difficult decision to authorize a demolition on a building such as this. My family, my husband and I have redone 2 heritage buildings, one built in 1870s, and that was a job and a half, let me tell you. We found really interesting stuff in the wall there. But the state of this building, similar to other heritage buildings that we have in the downtown, is in a horrible state. We've all heard that repeatedly. And I don't place that burden of guilt on the current property owner, but I think each successive property owner owns a little bit of that burden of guilt. So recently, and I'm just saying these things because there's proponents in the heritage community here, and recently council passed a motion requesting that staff report back on how do we further strengthen our property standards bylaw so that we can decrease opportunities for demolition by neglect going forward. So in consistency with my support of the zoning bylaw amendment, I am going to be supporting the demolition request here. I think that we have to look at this proposal for what it is, the zoning bylaw change that is. And I see that there was a lot of compromise made, and I spoke on to staff that they did a lot of good work in bringing the proponent to the decision that we made on that project. And the proponent also did a lot of bending on that. I understand that to be in that industry, it costs a lot of money to do these sorts of jobs. And it would have been a heck of a lot easier for the proponent just to say, nope, I don't want to do anything with any sort of heritage preservation. I just want to knock it all down and build what I want to build there. But what I see here is a lot of compromise in that. So I won't go on any further. I just hope everybody understands my position.
Councillor Helmer?
Thanks very much. Based on our previous discussions at committee, I don't think that this motion is going to make it very far, but I'm going to try anyway. I think what we should do is designate the properties and then consent to the demolition with conditions that it only be after site plan approval has happened. I think it's a very reasonable way to deal with the problem. We certainly can consent to the demolition of heritage designated buildings. I think it's very clear that these are heritage worthy properties and that they should have been designated. I hear what Ms. Miller is saying in terms of dealing with things in the appropriate order. And I think that that's important to me. I always tried to deal with planning issues on the planning merits and heritage issues on the heritage merits. I know that many of my colleagues try and have the same kind of approach. And I think what happens when we deal with them out of order is that we end up in a situation like this, where some people think this decision has already been made and there's nothing else we could do differently, or that there's something in what we passed in the zoning bylaw that's going to be contrary to designation at this point. And certainly I don't know that if that's true, then the Heritage Act has some pretty big gaps. And we're just going through the motions here and not really having a fair hearing on the issue of demolition. I don't think that is the case. I think, sure, there's provisions under the zoning bylaw for commemoration of Camden Terrace. That could still be done, even if it's designated and demolished. You could still do the commemoration. So I don't think that's necessarily contrary. I think we missed an opportunity to do a conditional approval because we didn't deal with the issue of heritage designation earlier on. And I think our advisory committee on heritage was trying to get us to do that, and we may have missed the boat on that front. I do think we have a huge backlog of priority one properties that we need to look at, and I think we've done a good job through heritage conservation districts of dealing with big chunks of them all at once. And certainly once we had a heritage conservation district in place, as was referenced by Councillor Park at 183 King Street, it's a totally different conversation. It's already designated as a heritage building, and then we're talking about different things. And the people who buy those properties know that they're in a heritage conservation district and that they're already protected under the Heritage Act. So I think that the appropriate thing is, and I think a lot of my colleagues still would have consented to the demolition of these properties. I wouldn't have. I still think it was not the right thing to do. But as a group, I think we still would have consented to the demolition of the properties, even if they were designated. It doesn't really change any of the facts at issue in the discussion. And I think that that would be useful. I think it provides this additional degree of protection so that we don't end up with demolished buildings and then an empty lot where maybe years before something happens. I certainly hope that if the buildings are demolished, that the development proposal proceeds very quickly. But it's also possible it's not all or nothing. It could be, you demolish the buildings, phase one of the development goes up, and then phase 2 and 3 never happens, right? I mean, these are a very big project, and you might end up with a 9-story building and no Camden Terrace. And, I think that this kind of control of putting forward the designation and then saying conditional demolition only after the site plan's been accepted, it eliminates that possibility where you have this big gap where we'd end up with a larger surface parking lot and not the building that everybody would like to see there. So I'm going to put that forward, and I'll see if there's a seconder. I thought I had already emailed the wording, but I hadn't. It was just sitting there. So I have slightly different wording than that, but it's very similar. I'll see if there's a seconder at this point. There may not be, which would make it kind of moot. No, that was our clerks being very helpful in trying to capture what I was saying as I said it. I just emailed to Ms. Westlake Power more specific information. So, Mr. Chair, there seems to be a little confusion. I see some reactions from our staff and also my colleagues. So what I'm trying to say is, we can designate the properties and we can consent to the demolition, which we need to decide on by the 11th of October. Unfortunately, we're right up against the wall. We have to decide about that by the 11th of October, otherwise we're deemed to have consented. We can say we consent to it, but with these conditions, and the condition is going to be a site plan application has to be approved by the approval authority, has to be done by the approval authority before the building can be demolished. And I don't want to put more conditions on, like I think other people might want it to be like a whole heritage alteration permit, but I just think we've already decided what's going to happen in terms of the planning permissions. This is in keeping with that. It just makes sure that we don't have demolition before site plan approval has happened.
We will get Mr. Fleming to comment. And I wonder, I just asked the committee if you would like the applicant to comment on this or not. I would, if it's all right. So you will be able to comment on this afterwards, after staff speaks, Mr. Raj.
Well, Mr. Chair, I genuinely don't want to enter into or interfere with the debate of the committee, so I'm offering these comments with greatest
We've been
respect.
properly warned.
Yes. So stop me if this is in any way appropriate, but what I am trying to do is my best to explain what might be some of the implications of what's being proposed. And I do believe that what's being proposed is something that could be done if committee so wishes. I want to point out that last month when we came forward with our application, we were responding to council's request, and I'm not suggesting staff weren't in agreement with council's previous request, because I think I need to be honest on that front. I think we were. But the request was that we bring forward both the planning application and the consideration of the heritage designation at the same time. So on September 6th, we brought the heritage designation, the reasons for designation that were forwarded by Latch. We had those attached to the report that came to you. And we brought the planning application and we said, here's where we're at. And our recommendation was designate 93 and 95 Dufferin. So we had the reasons for designation there, and we said start the process, and we'll be coming back with that formal process initiated. With respect to Camden Terrace, on the question of designation, we said we believe that commemoration is the way to go, weighing out all of these considerations of the development application, the desired design. You might recall I said that we worked for almost a year on trying to convince the applicant to somehow integrate the heritage building into that particular heritage building into the new design. But that wasn't something that we could come to terms with. That said, we did get 93 and 95, and we did get the commemoration, and there's a number of other pieces there that we felt on balance did a good job of conserving heritage, commemorating heritage, providing for development in the downtown, which in turn, as we pointed out, would fuel an economy that helps to preserve other heritage buildings, such as our Main Street, for example. So that came to you, and I'm looking at the report right now, and it says designate 93, 95, start that process up, commemorate this. So what I would submit to you is that the anticipation then coming out of that is the decision was made on the designation. So normally, when someone comes forward with a demolition application on a listed building, we come to you and say either designate or allow for the demolition. Well, as has been pointed out, the demolition was a little bit later, it came in later, and we couldn't get to the committee at the same time, but we dealt with the designation question there, and the determination from council at that time was to not designate. One other implication I just want to point out is that if you are to designate, what you're essentially suggesting, and I turn to Mr. Kotsvis to clarify this, but I think with the make safe order, the proponent would have to put money into the building to make it safe for the purpose of demolishing it subsequently. In other words, putting money in now, acknowledging and understanding, as has been pointed out, that the intent is for it to be demolished. And I think that it's at least important for you to understand that that would be one of the consequences of a designation of this property.
Anything further from staff?
Through the chair, just in regards to the motion itself, I think Part B would not be applicable at this point, but I'll look to Mr. Yanchula for more advice on that. And really what you would be doing is passing a notice of intention to designate, and then you would be, I think you're required then to consult Latch and have an ad put in the paper for the intention. There's a time period, and then you actually designate. Once designated, then you could, we'd have to probably report back to you about the demolition process, and then as a follow-up to then consent to the demolition after it's designated. I believe that's the process, but I'll look to Mr. Yanchula for more clarification.
So I understand the intent. George is right. You have to issue a notice of intent to designate. That would be what you would decide that you would, that would be part of your recommendation that you would decide on today. After you issue the notice of intent to designate, there's an appeal period, that comes around, then you finally decide that it is designated, then you are dealing with the designated heritage designated property. And then you can exercise the privileges that those have under the Heritage Act at that time.
I have to say anything. I just wanted to give you that opportunity, as long as it's not.
Thank you. I would like to just make a couple comments.
Okay.
Obviously, the concern. Sorry. Yeah. Obviously, the concern that's not quite spoken, but seems to be clear, is are we really going to build this development? Well, I can tell you we've been in this now for about 4 years. We spent in excess of 7 figures on this. We're into many millions of dollars. We haven't backed away. We're still here. We spent 1.5 years working with staff to come up with a very specific design for this site. I have been building in London for over 30 years. I took a little bit of a hiatus when I got into the technology business, but that's a bad story, so we don't want to remember that. But I've built a number of projects. In fact, I built every single project that I ever put an offer on the property. I've never backed out of a deal yet. This is a big, big project. We understand that, and it's a big one for the city. But, you know, the size of the developer doesn't necessarily guarantee, as we've seen, guarantee in London that they build something. We're here to build. We bought the property for that. We committed to a very specific design, worked with the staff, made a deal with them. It was not easy on either side, but we made the deal, and we stand here today to stand by that deal. We want to get on with building. We have had the preliminary pre-consultation on site plan. We've met with site plan people at the city already, and there's some more information that needs to come. That's the only reason the formal application is in. Stantec is preparing the application right now. There's a couple other details that have to come, but obviously we had to get our zoning in place before that happens. But all things being equal, we hope to be building the beginning of the year.
Okay. Deputy Mayor?
Thank you, and thank you for your comments. I'm not going to second the motion that's on the floor, and so as I listened to Mr. Fleming talk, whether it's implicitly or explicitly, I think council spoke, and it may not be explicitly contrary, but it's pretty darn close to contrary. As you said, we dealt with the properties on Dufferin Street, and we had the opportunity to deal with these ones at council when it came forward the last time, and we chose not to. So I would suspect that Matt, you know, I don't need to push the issue tonight, but Madam Clerk might even find this motion to be contrary, so I won't be seconding it.
Address a couple of issues, but I should leave the chair for that, just to make. Right.
Councillor Squire.
Just to be clear, I think I agree with the deputy mayor that council, in fact, decided this issue for all intents and purposes. And if we make this tonight or turn down the demolition. We're doing something that's contrary to the will of council. And on top of that, I can almost 100% assure the people here that when it goes back to council, council will repeat what they did on the last occasion, and they will move on with this development. But I struggled long and hard about this, and the one thing I'm still not entirely comfortable with, I wish I had more comfort on the area of the soils and the state of the building. And all I can say is that through this whole process and all the money that was spent, I'm sure, on presentations, those 2 points were not clearly enunciated to the people sitting here. And as a result, you know, we hear from people saying, well, council didn't listen, or you missed this, or you're making a decision when there's no problem with soils. And that is concerning. I'm satisfied from what I heard and other information that these buildings are in a very poor state, and resurrecting them or repairing them would be difficult, if not impossible. And that has a lot of weight. The other issue for me is, and I know there's a heritage community and they're here and they have a view, but there is a lot of other people, and including historians, who have clearly said to me that the commemoration of the building inside the glass is an appropriate commemoration of the structure. And they have disputed the fact that the only thing that can happen is the buildings are left standing. So I just want to make sure that everyone knows there is a different point of view. A couple of other issues I really have to address. The idea, and it's always brought up, that there's lots of empty lots to build buildings on, and why isn't that happening? We have no ability to make someone sell an empty lot to a developer to build a building. And many people have come to me and I have said to them, why don't you buy an empty lot and build on it? And their answer is, we would love to, but they are not for sale. So when people come back again and say, build them on empty lots, you need to talk to the people who have the empty lots and won't build on them. Not the people who are buying property, accumulating property, and put in the situation where there are buildings on them. There were a lot of other suggestions that there were all these things the city could do for people on private property. We could make them do this. We could make them fix them up. If they didn't fix them up, we could buy them. That would not survive. Not only is it contrary to law, but it wouldn't survive any legal challenge. And in fact, the Heritage Act makes it very clear that when you have a property that's on the list, if there's an application for demolition, it comes here, and then we have that decision to designate. We don't have a right to buy a property. We don't have a right to expropriate a property. We don't have a right to buy it. And the only way we could get that is if the province, in its wisdom, decided to give us that power. So again, one of the things that I think the heritage community would be well served to do is to speak to the province and MPPs and say to them, why don't you give the cities more teeth so they can exercise this authority? Because it is very frustrating to always be the receivers sort of the blame in a way. And I know it's not blame, but in a way to say, why didn't you do something? It's very, very difficult. So I just wanted to make that clear. But the heritage community, in terms of focusing on the issues of the soil and the condition of the building, that was fantastic. And I hear what you're saying, that the evidence should have been clear. And on the other issue of us deciding heritage independently of development, you're absolutely correct in that regard, that we should be doing that. And I can assure you I try to do that every time. So thank you very much. All right, is there a seconder for the motion? There being none, then the motion fails. Are we ready to bring up the main motion, Council? Why don't we do that? Councillor Helmer.
Could you call A and B separately from C and D? They don't all be different, but.
Absolutely. So we'll be calling A and B separately. Call A first? Oh, that's okay. I thought we were going to do A separately.
Didn't I do that? Oh, I need them.
You need to withdraw so that we can do that. The A and B separately? Oh. All right.
Sorry, I only saw A on my screen.
That's okay.
At this point, I think we've heard us vote on this one and then we can keep going.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 3-1. Closing the vote, the motion carries 3-1. Closing the vote, the motion carries 4-0.
Right. Moving on to item number 10, which is a staff report regarding invasive species management and an irregular result. Is there anything that you wish to say in your defense? Sorry, I wanted to say that once before I was done.
Sure, through you, Mr. Chair. This tender was let for the management of the city's woodlands, and unfortunately, we only received one bid, and there was a requirement through the procurement bylaw to bring that back for your approval. Information's in the report about why we feel we should still proceed with this. The bid did come in on budget. It's a multi-year contract, and it's work that we need to get on with in order to manage our woodlands.
Any questions? Councillor Helmer?
Thank you very much. My question is about page 115 of the report, which is the source of financing. I see that we're paying for this contract for future work out of a capital budget from 2015, and it's like about half of the money is coming out of this 2015 budget. So could you explain I mean, it's fine in the sense that it's appropriate for the work, but it's weird that we haven't already spent that money.
Yes, through the chair, the councillor is correct. This is a program that's been up and running for several years, and council, in fact, topped the program up in 2016 to match the 2015 amount. We've had some difficulty in the past actually spending the funds that were allotted to us, partially because of the complexity of the work that has to be done. This contract is being let in order to solve that problem, contract the work out to one company that can do many tasks for us so that we can get on with the work that's been backlogged.
Anything further? We need a mover and seconder. We got free massages. Do we want them at the beginning? We won them at a baseball game. I'll explain later. Don't ask. Anything further? Call the question.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 4-0.
And the next matter is a request for delegation status from Kay Milson. I don't know if he is here. Usually we grant, I'm sort of anticipating we would grant the status in here at the next meeting. Is that? Okay, maybe we bring that motion up. Assuming he would have known that. Yes, Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, this one kind of has, I'm getting flashbacks to an earlier item on our agenda. And so when the delegation comes forward, could we have a little bit more of a detailed report into how we should look at this than we had earlier today? No flies on the one earlier, but it just would be helpful because, you know, once again, this is a retroactive kind of, and I, frankly, and I appreciated Councillor Helmer's comments earlier, I'm not sure how to approach some of these things, so it would be really helpful if we could have some help on that. So if that means that the next meeting isn't the best meeting to come, it's been waiting for 3 years, it'll wait for another 2 weeks.
Any thoughts on that?
I just heard Mr. Chair, Mr. Yanchula say, very much appreciate that. So I think that just it's difficult for us to get a report completed and into the next agenda. So if we could have 1 or 2 cycles to get a report done and in, then that would be terrific.
Okay, we can just change it to when we're getting here.
It's a future meeting and then a detailed staff report.
Okay, so we've changed that, I believe. So until the staff report comes. So we need a mover and seconder. Anything further? Voting?
Closing the vote, the motion carries 4-0.
Is the committee content if we bring up the same motion on the next matter? All right. Yes, Councillor Helmer.
For this one, I'm not sure that we need a report. You know, this one seems pretty straightforward, and I don't want to put a report on our staff. I'm not sure what Councillor Park was going to say.
All right, we need a mover and second. There's nothing there about a report, is there? Oh, Councillor Park. Councillor Park, I keep forgetting.
I'm just blending into the background, that's fine. I'm happy either way. Like, as Councillor Helmer said, it is a pretty straightforward thing, but if staff feel the need to impart any information on council, I'm willing to receive it.
All right, so we need a mover and seconder. Anything further? Call the question. Right.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 4-0.
And the next matter is the PAC deferred list. Any questions or comments? All right. Motion's up. Mover and seconder. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Very brief. It's just very good to see a lot of complete on this deferred matters list. So I hope you guys all have a big cup of coffee tomorrow morning to celebrate.
Okay. Call the question.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 4-0.
All right, before we adjourn, for the benefit of the clerk, I just want to say, who is a big Tigers fan, I just want to say, go Jays. And And we will have a motion for adjournment. Seconder? All in favor? I just want to